Wait a second, what's happening? Avatar's not out until like December. How did we get here? Well, it's a bit of a story. A few weeks ago, we were contacted by Ubisoft about a potential opportunity to play Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora before release, and there was one not so small catch. Ubisoft was offering to fly us out to play Avatar at the main development studio, Massive Entertainment, in not so nearby Malmo, Sweden. It was the first time we'd been invited to such an event, and the opportunities for Joe and I to see each other are very few and far between just because of where we are. It's been over 4 years since the last time, so it was very tempting to go just to be able to hang out and then also play Avatar and make a weird video out of it. Joe, of course, was immediately on board. What's a quick flight from London to Copenhagen? It's like 2 hours of free travel with a free bed at the end. No problem for him. I did have a bit further to travel, but it would be kind of fun. It is only like 30 hours of plane riding in a 5-day period. Yeah, sure, let's do it. So yeah, Ubisoft flew us over to Copenhagen and Malmo and put us up in a hotel for 4 days while we got to hang out together, eat, drink, and then eventually play 2 hours of Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, see the studio in Malmo, meet some of the developers, and we figured it was time to make a video. We actually were able to sneak in some Mythbustery tests during our limited playtime, which was especially interesting to do with developers standing right behind us watching, and we'll get back to that nonsense in a bit, but first, let's get Joe on a call so we can have a chat about our time with Avatar. We played Avatar.
We did, for 2 hours.
For 2 hours, each of us, on our own PC. I almost said PlayStation, but we were using PlayStation controllers on big fancy PCs.
Yeah.
We had 2 hours to pretty much do whatever in the chunk of the game.
Yeah.
Relatively, you know.
It was in a bit of a weird spot of the game, I will say. It was quite difficult to be dropped into the middle of an open world Ubisoft game. Because, you know, those things have systems and tools and radial weapon wheels.
And tutorials and things that we did not have the context for.
Yeah, we didn't get those tutorials. Most of it was pretty intuitive if you played a Ubisoft game or an open world game.
Yeah.
But this game has a big emphasis on like fauna and flora. You're on Pandora, and Pandora is a big focus of the game, obviously. So being dropped in with like 17,000 different species of plants and trees, everything's kind of sentient on Pandora. So yeah, I will say, and this will only be relevant to us, I would assume. I imagine everyone playing the game will be introduced a lot more gently than we were. But those first 20 to 30 minutes were a little overwhelming. There was like a plant spitting at me. I was like bouncing off a pad.
I immediately got attacked by like 8 dogs, you know, and it took me like 2 minutes to figure out how to pull up my weapon. Even though we had a placard with the controls, I was just like, my brain was like, oh, what's happening? But yeah, how do you feel overall, like just broadly about our time, like the video game? Because like beforehand, prior to any of this, I think when we saw the gameplay, you know, sort of the proper reveal this year, just a few months ago at E3, whatever you call it now, we were kind of like, oh, Avatar, but Far Cry, that I'll play that. and you like Far Cry more than I do, but just I like bright, colorful first-person shooters, and I came out of the E3 showing just kind of being like, yeah, okay, I'm interested.
I would say 7 months ago I didn't care about the Avatar IP at all, and then I watched Way of Water, and we're not going to divert into a film review, but the plot of that movie, I have no idea, but the one thing I came away from that movie thinking is, actually, Pandora is kind of cool, and I kind of like seeing more of that world. And I've said multiple times across the years in the podcast that Far Cry has always kind of been my guilty pleasure. I think everyone who's ever liked a Ubisoft franchise just has to confess that sometimes a checklist game where you just pop heads for 15 hours is good for dopamine sometimes. And that's what Far Cry was for me. But 6 was the breaking point. It was the first one I didn't finish in the series. Again, just fatigued with the format. I felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again. And even with a guilty pleasure, everyone's got a breaking point of repetition, and 6 was that for me. So I was definitely interested in Avatar, and the one thing that I really kind of needed coming away from it was to be this is a refresh for what the Far Cry formula was, and it's a suitable and substantial refresh, because I think they're making Far Cry 7. That's going to be very interesting when Avatar and Far Cry are side by side, because we can get into it later, but it felt like some of the creative team didn't maybe love the comparison to Far Cry.
I was gonna say, you just said Far Cry about 85 times, and
it's Far Cry, man.
It's definitely
it's different, but the format and feel of the flow, I would say, is very Far Cry-esque. And I can understand that the creative team maybe wants to get away from that, especially if they want to keep Far Cry itself going. But I like Far Cry. I don't know. I don't see it as an insult. Maybe they do from a creative standpoint, that they're trying to make something really fresh. But yeah, you're blowing up outposts, and you're
marking guys.
You're marking guys, and I always thought as Far Cry as the flora and fauna game that Ubisoft does, where you're getting attacked by elephants and tigers and
first-person jungle game, outpost marking,
collectathon. It's definitely doing a lot of new things, but I don't mean it's an evolution on Far Cry as an insult. It's actually kind of what I was looking for.
I got the sense from especially the creative lead that they've been asked or compared to Far Cry a lot, and they're just kind of annoyed with that.
Yes,
and I get it, because it's just saying it's this game, but this game is such a lazy, simple thing to do as well. And I do think we try to avoid that as much as we can in our discussions, but
the video game industry is very reductive, and
it's shorthand, and it works. But people, like you said, people like Far Cry, and that's not a bad thing. And then he also, like you said, they said there are a lot of differences that come just by the setting change, and I would agree with that. And I also would say, as someone that hasn't liked a lot of Far Cry, my biggest problem with Far Cry historically has been, the shooting has never been super satisfying, and it's been a little clunky to play. And I think probably the biggest surprise for me from playing Avatar was how good the movement felt.
Yes, it did.
They kind of didn't talk about it at all. They talked about a few things and put an emphasis on a few things that we'll get to, like sound. They talked about that a lot before playing and after playing. But the Far Cry movement has always just been you walk around, you run and jump and shoot, and that's it. This is definitely, I would say, pulled some inspiration from, like Apex, or you can slide, you can jump. If you do a slide jump, you can then double jump after that.
Yeah, that feels good.
And very quickly, I was just sprinting around, slide jumping, double jumping, just intuitively and naturally. It's one of those things that's just game feel is hard to quantify, but the movement felt really good. And everyone, talking to everyone there, they all said the same thing. Everyone agreed. It was oh, the movement's really good. Mm-hmm. And honestly, good movement in a first-person shooter goes a very long ways for me.
There's also a thing which I've always weirdly had another guilty pleasure for. I think we talked about it many times, which is I like platforming up a tower.
Right. Yeah, a big chunk of the demo was that.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that Avatar has towers, because the mission I'm thinking of is when you're on the way to get the bird and you're climbing one of those giant kind of gravity-defying islands.
Yeah.
But it was a big climbing mission. but like 10 times more substantial than a tower. I don't have anything else to say except for I like it. I like climbing things. I like following an obviously laid out path and just slowly getting higher up on a environment. I think it's fun, and that was part of one of the missions. Hopefully it's like an integral part of moving around the game, because it's a very vertical world, Pandora. And yeah, I like climbing things, and you were climbing things in this game. It would have been nice in the demo to see more of the environments that will be available in the game, more biomes.
Right.
Because the one in the demo was kind of the very, like, Avatar 1 atypical jungle setting.
Yeah, and so they said that, like, it takes place in a different area from both movies, which is, you know, that's nice. But yeah, we were in sort of, like, I would say the starting zone. There was a home tree, stuff like that.
It sounds like there's 3 areas, and the other 2 sounded more, like, creatively interesting to me.
Yeah, the first one was very much just like Avatar 1, here it is. And that's fine, that's not a bad thing. But yeah, the other 2, it was like the second area is like a giant sort of windswept plains, it sounds like.
That seemed really cool.
There's like, big windswept plains. It's showed up in the trailers. And then
there's like a spooky forest or something, like a foggy forest.
Yeah, it's like the Silent Forest, I think. And they said it's sort of Pacific Northwest, you know, big.
Great woods.
Yeah, sequoia trees, fog, mist, moss. And so that's exciting. I'm curious to see that stuff more than the basic familiar Avatar stuff, which was well done.
The one thing that came across like most passionately across our talks and demo is Pandora itself. It feels like there's so much technical work that has gone into making Pandora interesting to explore and technically impressive. A lot of cooperation between what's the actual film studio who like
Lightstorm.
Yeah, like direct cooperation between those two to make it not only canon, but just like make sense and be verified with the actual creators of the Pandora world. And that was like a huge focus, is Pandora and making that place cool. So yeah, it would have been nice to see the other 2 biomes, but it sounds cool from what we've heard.
I think a benefit of it being the area we played being the very familiar stuff is that you can compare it to what you've seen in the movie and be like, oh, they pretty much nailed it, right? They've got all those plants, the ones that go boom, 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 which is
yeah, I like that.
It's good. It's satisfying to just run up to them. I would say they pretty much nailed that biome from the first movie. And yeah, it's exciting to see where they go with it. That was definitely, you could tell they're proud. People are proud of like the art and sound and general sort of world building that they've done. They've clearly spent a lot of time and energy on that stuff. They put a lot of emphasis on sound.
Yeah.
Across the whole thing. They definitely had their proper 3D audio set up on the computers. We had good headphones. And then we saw some behind the scenes stuff about the sound creation. And just generally everyone was like, the sound. And I will say, it sounds very good. I mean, it's sort of like... sound is such an underappreciated thing. I've always cared about sound, but video games sort of get, I don't know, no one ever talks about how good does games sound. You hardly ever hear that anymore.
Yeah.
It's, not to get too into the weeds here, it's like, it's next gen only or current gen only. I still want to call it next gen because
I know, yeah.
So they're able to use a lot more of the modern tech for basically just like, we can play a lot of sounds and position them properly. I definitely noticed the 3D audio here. It sounded great. It's a hard thing to be like, oh wow, but they seem to have done a very good job with it. There are a lot of sounds and they are nicely placed.
They got loads of sounds.
Yeah, they got like using ray tracing for audio stuff. It is a cool thing. I have read about that a few times before, and it's a neat way to use that technology. Another thing that they also did mention a couple times was, and it's hard to know until you play the full game, but they had said like quality over quantity in terms of like number of open world activities and things like that, map icons. I would love to believe that. It's just hard to know until you see the full game, right? From where we were, I will say it didn't seem like there was a ton. Like, there were a few side quests, there were a few little random encounters you could come across.
Yeah.
And it sounded like there would be more of those random encounters, they just weren't in the version that we played.
Yeah, there wasn't a metric ton of map markers.
Yeah, so it's very hard to know what the final quantity will look like, but I would like to believe them. quality over quantity is always the best way to go. And I think it would be nice. I don't need 40 outposts to clear in any video game anymore. So
we did one outpost, and it was pretty significant in size.
Yes, yeah, it was big.
So yeah, if there's only like 10 of those, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to know. But yeah, combat.
I would say the combat feels good. I've always liked the shooting in Far Cry games. I know it's not a Far Cry game, sorry. I can't help it. But I've always liked bows. I like it in every game I use when I was playing Far Cry. I would rather use a bow than like a silent sniper. I think they feel satisfying and impactful, and obviously with the Na'vi, the bows are like one of the main weapon archetypes.
Yeah.
There was 2 of them. They both felt great. I really like the heavy bow because heavy stuff just feels satisfying and punchy, and the audio work is really good in that regard as well.
Yeah.
Very bassy. I kind of strayed away from the one assault rifle we had access to just because, I don't know, it just felt like a regular ass gun. Not in a terrible way. It felt like a pretty punchy, weighty, okay assault rifle.
Yeah.
I just like bows, and the game has an emphasis on bows, so I would say that's probably a good sign for me. This is a small little sub note, but I liked that when I was doing the main outpost of the demo, you could go in and out of like alerted security status.
That's actually a big
That's a very
note.
small thing.
I would say that's not a small thing. I think that's a huge thing, honestly. Every game is still just like you alert one guy and everyone knows you're there.
Like this was like chunks of people are alerted, and it felt really easy to get back into stealth.
Totally. Yeah, it's nice to. It sort of seemed like sort of in like a 50-foot radius, people would hear you, but then it was really easy to break line of sight and skitter away and have people not sure where you're at, which was cool. There's also seemed like good enemy variety. I mean, there's obviously the human faction's fairly simple. It's just like dudes in mechs, but there's also like all the aliens, which is, I'll be curious to see. I know you fist fought a giant lizard thing for 15 minutes.
I did, yeah. He did.
One thing I'm a little confused by slightly is just like the mechs died really, really easily.
I think that's probably just by design, because these games are always just power fantasies, right? And they're very common in the world. So I just don't think they could be like a Big Daddy, because there's like 6 of them per base.
Yeah, it's just sort of one of those like, oh, dude in, giant mech exosuit, and then you just shoot him like 3 times and he dies.
Maybe they're a glass cannon type thing.
I did like that fighting the normal people, not in a mech suit. You realize or remember that you're like a giant creature.
Oh, right, yeah.
And you can kill guys by just like sprinting into them or sliding into them, which is really stupid.
I didn't do that was cool.
Yeah, and they just ragdoll and go flying, and by just like sliding into them. And they look like little ants. A little thing, but I did get a kick out of that for sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, the combat felt good. And like, what makes a game feel good comes down to lots of small things, including, the movement, which we already said is really good. The sound, which sound makes weapons feel much better. All that stuff, yeah, it felt good. And being able to sneak around and fly off or jump away.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about the bird much, because you actually can use that in combat.
Yeah, you can shoot while on it, yes.
You can call it in mid-combat, like use it to get up somewhere, then jump off the bird. I didn't use that a lot because I feel like that would take a bit more practice to get into.
Yeah, we fought some helicopters for a while.
For a long time, yeah.
Trying to land on helicopters like idiots.
I'll say that, like, the bird felt good to control. I was, like, jumping off the bird and shooting at helicopters while I was falling, which is a fun little gimmick and felt pretty generous, again, with the hitting. The only thing I'm a bit concerned about is, I don't know, just flying from A to B. There was a point where I just kind of put the controller down and let my burb just keep flying, because there wasn't a whole lot going on in the sky. I think I could see like a helicopter that was on its way to like give some pacing and get in my way, and I'd have to battle it. But yeah, I feel like when you get a mount, maybe one of the problems is you can just fly anywhere and there's not much going on that journey.
I did notice that at some point, and I will say this as a compliment, I think, is that I, early on before the bird, I was basically just doing my usual thing, which is walking everywhere. When there's like an open world that I like hanging out in. I just
Yeah.
will walk everywhere. And I did get a little poke on the shoulder being like, you could go get the bird and get around way faster. And, I understand why they wanted me to do that, but I think it's a compliment to the fact that I was just kind of like, I'm quite happy just walking around, taking my time. But I do know what you mean. Yeah, there was a part where I was just like, fly back to home tree. And it was just like, you don't have to, it's not like riding a horse in Red Dead where you have to keep sort of active with the bird.
You like spam a button to go faster.
Yeah, you can sort of pulse that to move up, but you can also just like set the controller down and it'll just fly straight continuously.
Yeah, I think I just miss the like precarious nature of you find a plane in Far Cry and it's like, oh god, I need to get off the ground without clipping a canopy or I'm going to explode. And they're always just like a little rickety and you don't know if you're going to survive the trip.
Vehicles in Far Cry historically are just like, things are going to go bad in about 30 seconds. Yeah.
The bird was very free. Very generous. I don't know if you can get knocked off of it. I guess if you get shot and die, obviously. But yeah, it just felt a bit thoughtless. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe you just want a mental break. And you get on the burb and you just fly from A to B.
Yeah. And it's hard to know what else there is to do with the bird. And
I feel like something I don't have like any grasp on is the story.
Yeah.
They did their best in their defense to kind of set up the story.
Yeah, totally.
But again, it's 2 hours. It's very overwhelming. I'm just trying to get to grips with how to play the game, let alone try to figure out these like different tribal conflicts. And there's like politics obviously going on, different sub-races of Na'vi, and they've got problems and different, I don't know, probably different religions and way of lives. And I think the protagonist is like a weird experiment who doesn't have any memory, and you've got to like win over the culture, kind of the same as the second movie. So yeah, didn't really get a grasp on the story. So hard to say how I feel about that. I think you always have to wait to the final product anyway, because it's all about like the character growth and how it comes together.
I'm curious to see if they do like the second movie did, like lots of world building with other clans or whatever they're called in the Avatar universe.
I think they said there was 3 clans in the game, I think.
Yeah, one for each bio or one for each like main biome.
Yeah.
So yeah, much like the environmental variety in the other 2 zones, I'm curious to see what the culture stuff is like, because they do like. That's one of the things that they really seem to care about in the Avatar. Like James Cameron and his people, they're just like, we gotta create a bunch of lore for these different parts of the world. And I enjoy that stuff. So I'll be curious to see what the windy place looks like from a cultural perspective, I would say.
And I think like my final thoughts is I came away from it positive. However, for me, it will all be about how it comes together and how it flows and how it's paced.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I'm quite fatigued when it comes to the open world genre. I'm gonna get probably bored of doing the same thing over and over. I'm like more sensitive to that stuff than maybe the average Ubisoft player. So yeah, I don't know if this will be a game where I play for like 5 hours, see all the biomes and think that was cool and put it down. Or will it actually get me? And that old feeling of playing Far Cry and being like, oh, I see all these things I want to tick off a list, and I sit there quite happily for like 6 hours just playing this game until it's late at night. I don't know if that's gonna happen, and I don't think we will know until the game comes out, because it's all about how everything comes together in the final package.
Definitely.
It's very easy to come away from 2 hours and like every individual aspect, but yeah, we'll just have to see how everything forms in its final way.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. Like all the individual aspects, I would say, were quite positive. But yeah, how it all comes together will be my main curiosity as well. I look forward to it more than I thought.
Yeah, I come away feeling positive, and I think mostly getting what I was hoping for and what I expected.
It was a little more than I was expecting, I would say, in terms of just like...
Yeah, in terms of the world for sure, for me.
Well, the world definitely, but even just like in terms of what was clicking with my brain, like the movement, that's one of those things that's like, I didn't expect that, and that goes a long ways. So those sorts of things.
And also we have mouse and keyboard to look forward to.
Yeah.
And I think a bow on mouse and keyboard feels amazing.
Oh, it's so good on, bows are great on a mouse. Yeah.
So if that game feels really satisfying to play, Pandora's nice to walk around in. It sounds good. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like something I could probably accidentally put like 40 hours into. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely. I could definitely see myself doing the same thing. Yeah. It was a neat look behind the curtain, and it was a positive impression of a game I was like mildly interested in, and now I'm a fair bit more interested and more looking forward to it. Yeah.
So far, no one's going to be very surprised about what it is, but it seems solid. Those are my detailed closing thoughts.
Now, watch us do a bunch of dumb shit in this unreleased video game. Before our little Mythbusters section, know that we had only about an hour left of our demo time to do this stuff, since the first hour was basically dedicated to learning how to play, and know that we had actual game developers watching us. They were all lovely and having fun watching everyone, and our guy who was there in case we needed help was from the testing team, so he definitely knew the answers to everything we tried, and seemed to get a kick out of all of it. But yeah, this was not done under anything resembling normal recording circumstances, so with that in mind, enjoy a few goofy little myths we managed to pull off.
Can't focus.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks again to Ubisoft for covering travel and accommodations for that trip. We were not at all expecting this to pop up in October for us, but we ended up having a really good time with it all, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Stay tuned for more. We've got a very busy November about to begin with tons of Call of Duty stuff, from more zombies to MW3's imminent release, and then in December, perhaps we'll be back to do that chopper myth for real when the game is actually out. And of course, a huge thank you to all of our supporters over at patreon.com/defendthehouse. We we wouldn't be able to do these weird, unexpected videos without your support. Supporting us over at Patreon, of course, gets you all sorts of things, including early access to lots of different videos. Unfortunately, not this one. That's just the way it went. But there's a ton of Chapter 11 already up on Patreon for people to watch. And a little birdie tells me there might be even more to watch over at Patreon very soon if you're a Zombies fan. Anyways, that's all for me. As always, be good, enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.